Welcome into my studio, and to my next demo I've got this branch with lots of things like moss and lichen and all different things growing on it. A lot of my Patreon members asked me to do some more videos featuring elements, so rather than just animals, so things like clouds and branches and bark. And I thought for a start that this one has lots and lots of different things going on with it, so it's going to need a lot of simplification at the beginning, and I hope you enjoy it. So as I said at the beginning, when you've got something this complicated, and there are lots and lots of different shades and tones and colours, it really needs to be simplified. So I've got my small piece of pastel matte paper, and I've got a very basic drawing just of the major parts, as you can see on there. Now you can do that with graphite pencil, you can draw directly on there, you can use transfer paper. There's lots of different ways. If you're using graphite paper or graphite pencils, don't let the marks be too intense, too heavy on there. Graphite, don't forget, it causes things to slip. So if you've put a real heavy layer of graphite pencil down on top of the pastel mat, you've got to put pastel on top, and it won't adhere to the surface of the paper because the paper tooth is filled with that slippable graphite. So use a kneaded eraser or normal eraser, or just don't push very heavy to make sure that you haven't got a lot of graphite on there. Now I'm blocking in the major shapes, the major elements, the major dark bits with a pastel pencil. So from what I've just said, you understand I wouldn't want to be blocking in now, shading in with a graphite pencil or a coloured pencil for that matter. That has the same type of principles. If you've got a wax or an oil based substrate like in coloured pencils, then obviously the pastel would resist going over the surface. So that's why I don't use things like that. So all I'm doing now, as I mentioned, I'm simplifying everything. It's really easy to get lost in amongst all of these moss areas, some greens, browns, yellows, and then we've got areas of just bark. So I need to make it as simple as I can, so I can then concentrate on the colours and the tones and the textures. So all I'm doing now, as I said, I'm just simply using a dark brown pastel pencil, and I'm blocking in the major darker shaded areas and the shapes and the forms. Now this whole drawing, even though it's a study, I'm trying hard to make it look realistic. I've chosen a subject that's got lots of different elements in there, so you'll see areas where I'm just drawing bark, other areas where I'm drawing mosses, etc. So rather than you just copying this for your own sake, you might as well do it as a drawing. Perhaps you've got your own trees nearby you can photograph, local birds, and that type of thing you can put in there and make your own artwork out of it. So take from this the techniques. Now it took me around about 4.5 hours to complete, so it's really quite a difficult subject. It's in depth, as I said. It's not just a quick 30-minute sketch. So obviously I'm going to be fast forwarding and speeding up various parts of it, and I'll speed up this in a moment just so that we can slow it back down to see the more difficult techniques and the details as well. Now some areas have got very vibrant whatever they are on there, so oranges and reds, lots of bright whites as well. So in the blocking in stage I'm going to indicate where they live as well. So you can see I've got more of a kind of a warm burnt sienna colour going in very lightly. You can even see the tooth of the paper through it. You can see that graininess of the paper. So that's how lightly I'm going, because I want to put in, or I'm going to have to put in, lots of layers to build this texture to make it look real. Now lots of times I say on my videos about the importance of using a mid-toned paper or canvas if you're painting, and you're going to see really exactly why I use that now. So I've put in the darks already, I've indicated lightly those richer coloured areas, and now I'm indicating where the bright areas are going to be. So I've got a pencil, it's not white, it's more of a creamy or a light grey colour, and I'm using it once again super lightweight, just indicating where the edges are and then filling in where these main white areas are going to be. It's creating, as I always say, that map underneath that I layer on top of. But you can see how I'm really giving myself the best chance of getting everything in the right place, because all I'm concentrating on now is putting things in the right place. Not really worried at all about colours or even tones. I'm just indicating where the darks are, where the mid-tones are, and where the lights are. But all of the finessing and the fine-tuning will come on top of this, so I can just concentrate on the placement more than anything. Now if I was using white paper, you can imagine these light elements wouldn't show up at all. So that's the primary reason why I'm using mid-tone paper. It's the primary reason why I do it when I'm doing oils as well. So unless the subject requires something super bright, now it could be flowers or even perhaps a really bright cloudless bright sky that I want to get a real punchy vibrancy to, that's the only time I'd really use probably the light grey pastel matte paper. Now the light grey paper is almost white. This is the dark grey paper. Okay, so that's the basics, almost a tonal drawing. We're really only thinking about the tones, the blacks and whites and that type of thing in there, the grey scale of it. So now let's call that stage 1, and let's move on now to stage 2. Let's add a few elements of the colours. So I'm putting in now, I've got, as you can see, I've got a green pastel pencil. Now I'm starting to add to the map. It's like putting a new layer on top of it, and I'm thinking to myself, right, where do the next big chunks live? Where are the greens, those mosses, where are they going to be situated on there? Once again, really light pressure. And as I keep adding these elements, layer upon layer, one at a time, all of a sudden things will start to become more three-dimensional looking, more real looking. It's just a progression. If I'd started, say, top left hand corner, and I was just detailing on that section and finishing it off and then going to the next section further along right, personally I don't like working that way. I like to get most of the subject at the same level and build just like animators used to, where they'd build layer upon layer. That's how I like to paint, that's how I like to draw, that's how the old masters used to do it as well, where you start off really loose and begin gradually refining and tightening up the details, those nuances. That's what makes it then look real, brings it to life. So I'm going to continue now adding onto this underlayer. Now I'm also going to put in a bit of the background, which is basically a subdued sky. I'm doing that because the background is going to be in the distance. I want the branch to come to the foreground, and by putting in just a little bit of this gives me the indication of somewhat how it's going to look in the end. So I'm not going to put in too much of the background, but as I said, just indications, and I've done that quite a bit on most of my recent pastel drawings. And as you can see, just a bit of pencil work all of a sudden starts to push that grey of the background back, allowing the darks of the branch to come forward, and it's just allowing me to assess how it's all going to look. So now let's think of this as the next stage, the next layer on top, and I'm thinking now properly about the darks, where the shadows are going to be, where we've got the dark lichen areas, where we've got the dark blacks and the bark. So in general, and I mention this frequently, with pastels and with oils, we generally work kind of get that base in first, then darks, midtones, lights. So I'm not covering up all the areas, I'm not just blocking it in, I'm trying to create texture. You can see I've switched to an actual black pencil. That's a Carbothello pastel matte, pastel black pencil. It's just in a holder, pencil holder extender. So I'm still not pushing hard. I'm still keeping in mind that I want to refine all of this. This is the next stage. Lightly blending in with my finger. That helps to push it into the surface of the paper so that we haven't got pastel really hanging around on the surface. It pushes it down into the tooth of the paper, the grain of the paper. And once again, just reiterating, this is not a detail or a final stage at all. This is the next layer, the next bit of progression, the next bit on my way, on my journey towards refining, which will only come right at the very end. So as you can see, even on a fairly small study such as this one, I'm using quite a lot of different coloured pencils. So some areas are dark but they've got a warmness to them, so I could go in perhaps first with the very dark browns or the blacks and then layer, as I'm doing now, the warmer colours on top, because very often you'll find, especially with the browns, that you don't have something that's very, very dark and very rich all at the same time. So that's why you've got to do that layering instead to try and create that colour. And you can't always get a perfect match, but more often than not that's not required either. Now I spin my pencil around after every few strokes quite frequently, because otherwise you get a flat area on there, flat spot, and the pencil becomes blunt very quickly. So if you use it at an angle as I'm doing now, and then like I say, every stroke, couple of strokes, you see me spin it around, that keeps the sharp point, or at least keeps it more of a conical shape, so that you're not getting those flat spots on the pencils after perhaps every 2 or 3 strokes. You can see I'm not going over everything, creating that texture, and this is real-time speed. So you can see I'm also not hanging about too much. I'm not rushing the drawing, but when I want to make sure that I'm not making sure that I've got, you know, quite a random appearance to my strokes, I do go a little bit faster. So now I'm going to start to build up this bark section, and as I mentioned before, we generally go from kind of get that underlayer blocking in stage, then we're working from mid-tone or dark, but gradually, generally going lighter and lighter on top, because in nature, even with this bark, we normally find the lighter parts are on top. So with fur, the light will be catching in general, but not always in general, the outer areas of fur which will have the bright highlights on. With this bark, it's the same thing. The shadow areas, the little creases and little nooks and crevices are down in the texture. The bright highlights where the sun is catching the tips of the texture is on top. So really study your subject. You'll see this for yourself, and you'll see how I'm building up different colors, but gradually going lighter, and then eventually having a sharp pastel pencil to put the detail and the texture and the highlights on top. You can see some areas have even got a tinge of green in there. Perhaps it's just the tiniest hint of little pieces of moss. Other areas have got more of a warmer pink flesh colour to them. And I enjoy searching out and looking in the references or looking in real life for those like colour changes. Now a little bit of a darker texture going on here, so more of a mid-tone grey. Once again, this is all real-time speed. using my dark pencil, my black, because the degree of contrast from light to dark, so if you've got real punchy blacks in here and highlights that are light as well, then that contrast will push the background back in the artwork and really bring the branch, the statement piece, the center of interest right forward in the artwork. And that's what I want. That's what will create that three-dimensional appearance. Okay, so we've got more darks down here, but they're not black, so I'm using one of my darkest grey pencils. I use this one quite a lot, this Pit Pastel pencil. As I said, it's not quite black, but it is a nice rich dark. So once again, using that fairly lightly, creating that kind of texture. We want to imagine how this bark would feel if we touched it and try and recreate that now on our two-dimensional medium, our piece of paper. And now really starting with that lighter texture. So you can see nice sharp pencil, pushing a bit harder as well to create those more distinct marks. Now the sun is catching this top section, this outer edge. I'm going to keep this section softer though. I want to create that curve appearance, so I'm going to slightly blur the outer edge and not put as much detail on it, and create more detail on sections like the one I'm working on now, so that that part that's closer to the viewer is even more detailed. Now on these brighter areas, you can see I'm using an even lighter grey pencil, nicely sharp, pushing in quite hard now to give me those sharp edges. It's all about building the texture up on top. Twirling that pencil around every few strokes again. As you can see, I do that all the time. I'm just going to let the video carry on now so you can see how I build up this texture in real time. So I'm going to stick with this section, detail it up quite a bit, and then start moving down from the top left over to the right hand side so that I'm not leaning on the drawing as I'm doing it too much. I'm not worried about the underlayer, but I wouldn't really want to be detailing it right up and then putting my hand on it. And even with glassine paper such as this, just the pressure of your hand will slightly affect the detail if you're resting on it a lot, so I don't want to be doing that. You can see I'm just adding and adjusting colours and tones. This is more, it's not really the full refinement stage yet, but you can see I'm getting more and more accurate with each layer that I'm putting on there. Now it all starts to pop and come alive a lot more when I start to put more of the brighter colours and more of the highlights on top of the underlayer. So that's what I'm going to start doing now. I'm going to have a look at these mosses, these brighter greens, and start to put them in. And all of a sudden, with just a few strokes, you'll see that this is really starting to get a lot more vibrancy to it. And having areas that are a lot more interesting to look at as well. But I've got to do that underlayer first, so all the preparation for these details and more refined layers going on top. So once again, coming in with those lighter areas. I'm also bringing in more of the darks and punching those up as well. So now that we've done, you know, the layering, you can see how when you look at the right hand side of the screen, how I really simplified it. It makes it much more manageable and easy then to put details on top, rather than getting overwhelmed with such a intricate subject, lots and lots going on. So by layering, it really breaks it down, and by the end you probably create something that you never thought possible. So now I'm just going to continue with the refinement, so continue adding slight colours on there, as you can see I'm doing now. Lots of the little subtleties. So this area, this top left hand corner will be quite close to being finished, and then I'll continue, as I mentioned earlier, on my way around and down towards the right hand side, bringing all of it up to this level of finish. Then I'll work on it as a whole, just adding the real fine details over all of it and putting the background in as well. So I think that's just about detailed enough on that top section. So you can see I'm moving down now on the drawing, doing the same techniques, putting in the darker areas, trying to get some texture in there rather than just blocking flat colours, keeping randomness, keeping in mind as well the things that I know will go on top of you. So if there are areas, or if there were areas that were very bright in this section, then I would leave space for them. But there's actually not, so I can go, you know, quite randomly here, just thinking about texture instead. Because you can put, you know, fairly light elements, light marks on top of a dark with pastel. But if it's something very bright, that's when I leave that section, I'd leave space for it. So continuing on now with this technique. I'm going to put a bit more of the background in place. I want to get more of an idea of how the branch is going to look when I've got some areas of the background vibrant and blue. So I'm using my pencil on the side. Doesn't take much pressure at all. And you can see just by putting a few marks in how the lighter blue recedes then. Even though it's a nice bright blue, it's actually receding in the artwork. That makes those darks on the branches look even darker because of the difference in that contrast.